Thank you very much for joining me. My name is Mara Stoika, and I am a software engineer on the runtime team, more specifically .NET Runtime, and even more specifically, example apps. You may have heard this morning Dave Cardella talk a little bit about example apps and what we do, in the sense that we're trying to complement the developer experience. We've got the dev labs, which we're doing right now, and also example apps where we're trying to give you a little extra on top of just the samples that we've been giving you over the years. So let's talk about the agenda first. So let me know if it makes you get feedback in the back. So I'm going to talk to you first about what example apps are, just a quick overview. And then I'm going to talk about what you're all here to see, the Maps app that is basically 4 apps in one. I'm going to give you a demo, then I'm going to go over the solution architecture and how it was all put together. And I'm going to show you how the code is shared between the 4 different apps. And at the end, I'm going to give you my contact information, resources, and I'm going to share with you some lessons learned if we have enough time. And I'll open it up for questions. So first things first, what are example apps? They are more than just sample code. What do we mean by that? They are real-world apps. They're based on ideas and suggestions that we got from all of you. You came to us and you said, I would really like to build an app like this, but I'm not sure how. I've got all of these samples that they provide me little bits of how to do one thing or another, but how do I put them all together? How would you, as an Esri developer, do it? What best practices do you recommend? That's what these example apps are. They're apps that we build the way we build apps internally and using best practices that we as Esri developers recommend. They're also complete working apps. They're not just sample code, right? You can go to GitHub, you can download them, run them, and they work. And they are open source. You can go to GitHub, you can download the app, and you can run it. They're released under an Apache 2.0 license, meaning you can do whatever you want with them. Download them, run them, change them, put your own data in them, modify them, fix a bug, submit a pull request. We would love to hear from you guys. And they also have supporting documentation. It's not just the app that you're getting, but you're also getting the documentation about how it was built, the data that we created to support this app, any workflows that are done in the app, and how to customize the app. Some apps are simpler in the sense that you can just plug in your data and they will work. Other apps are a little more complex. So we go through the steps of customizing. Where do you need to change it and how to make it work with your data? What do we have right now? We have 4 apps that have been released for the Android SDK. We have 3 for .NET, 2 for iOS, 1 for JavaScript. And in development, we currently have 1 app for each of the mentioned SDKs, and we also have a Qt app that you may have seen this morning demoed by Carrie in the plenary. How do you find these example apps? If you go to developers.arcgis.com, go to example-apps, or you go under getting started, and they will be listed right there. And you can see some screenshots of a few of the apps and the button where it says learn more about that app. Click on that and you get to the documentation page. And from there, you can get to the GitHub repository where you can download the code. Now, great. What if you have questions? How do you reach us? You can reach us through the GitHub repo. You can submit an issue and ask us questions that way. Or a better way would be through the community site. We have a community for example apps where we are waiting for your questions. You've downloaded an app, you've had issues running it, or it's a bit confusing. The documentation doesn't quite make sense. You want to know how to use it, how to change it to fit your needs. Let us know. Add a question there, a discussion, and we would be happy to answer. Okay. Now, let's look at the Maps app real quick. And since the screen resolution didn't quite work, I'm going to have to give me 1 second here. It's starting on this screen, and then I'll move it over there because I have to have the extended screen. Okay, it's going to be a little interesting. Whoa. No, that didn't work. Okay. Sorry, I'm just going to have to switch from the extended screen because I can't type and look at it this way. Where is it? Let's just do this for now, and I will switch back. So this is the WPF version of the app. I will show you this real quick, and then I'll show you just a quick glimpse at the Android version, just so you can see how it works on 2 different platforms. Also, keep in mind as you're looking at this, this also works on iOS and Universal Windows platform, which is Windows 10 and above, and any devices that run Windows 10. So what the Maps app does, it's a pretty basic app. It's your organization's mapping application, right? So it does geocoding, it does routing, it allows you to log into your organization, load some web maps that you have saved, and it also allows you to change base maps. So not a lot. The power of it is the fact that it works on 4 platforms. So let's go ahead and take a look at, let's search for a place that I want to go later. So I want to go to the Botanic Garden, okay? Start typing in, and the geocoder is starting to help, and it's giving me suggestions. I'm going to go ahead and tap on that. And it found the Botanic Garden. That's a little south of us here. I'm going to go ahead and click Route. And it's asking me for my credentials to sign into my organization. The reason it's asking me for that is because I'm using the World Routing Service, which uses credits. This is an open app again, so you can plug in your own routing service. If you have an internal router that you're using, you can just change that into the app, and it will work with that. So I'm going to go ahead and sign in, and it will provide me the route from here from the Palm Springs Convention Center with turn-by-turn directions. Let's go ahead and cancel that and take a look at a map that I have made of activities that I may want to do in Palm Springs once I'm done with work. And I have a few different things that I may want to see, the aerial tramway, all of this good stuff. But I can't really see them, so I'm going to go ahead and change the base map to something that's going to give me a little more contrast. Let's just do dark gray canvas. I don't know if that necessarily looks better or not, but I just wanted to show you how to do that. Okay, now, what I have over here, are you able to see? Okay, good, is the same app that's running on my Android device. I'm already logged in. I'm not going to give you much of a demo. I just want you to see that it looks basically the same way, right? I've got the same functionality. I can change the base map. I can open my maps. I can route if I want to. Let's say I want to go to Dallas. Just thinking about it. Okay. Okay, let's try New York. There it goes. Okay, so I have the same functionality that I have in the WPF app. It's generating the route. I'll have turn-by-turn directions and so forth. It's the same code that's running both of these apps, okay? Okay. So, how did I do all of this? Show of hands, how many of you in here are familiar with Xamarin? Most of you, okay. Good. So for those of you who are not familiar, just a quick overview. Xamarin is .NET's cross-platform development environment. You can write your code in C#, just like you do for your regular .NET apps, and you can deploy it as native apps on Android, on iOS. Basically, you've got the native platforms that are wrapped in C#. There are two flavors, called flavors, of Xamarin, and that's Xamarin Forms and Xamarin Native. Xamarin Forms, which is what I'm going to show you now, which is what this app is built in, is you're building one UI for Android, for iOS, and for Universal Windows Platform using .NET components. And you're limited to the components, the UI components that are common between all of these different platforms. Xamarin Native, you're building individual UIs for each of the platforms that you're working with. So you're going to have an iOS UI, an Android UI, a Windows UI, and you're sharing the business logic behind it. What you get is you get access to all of the native controls that are within those platforms. So you're no longer limited to just buttons and text boxes. Now you also have access to all the drawers and floaty buttons and all of the things that all of the different native libraries have. Okay, so this is Xamarin Forms. So let's take a look at, yes, no, maybe? Okay. So let's talk about the solution architecture. And by solution architecture, I mean my Visual Studio solution, what's in it. First, I want to show you this diagram, and then we'll go and take a look at it. So inside of it, I have an iOS app, an iOS project, right? mapsapp.ios, that's one project. I have a mapsapp.android project, which contains my Android code. I have mapsapp.uwp project, which contains my UWP code. All of these are part of the Xamarin Forms part of the solution, and they all share Xamarin.shared project. What's in here? It's one UI for all three of them, and any Xamarin-specific code. I also have mapsapp.wpf project, which is the app that you just saw running, the WPF one, with its own UI. And I have the shared project, which contains the business logic for the entire application, for all of these four applications, shared between all of them. Okay, ready to look at some code? So, collapse these real quick. And first off, in the back, can you see it? Yeah, okay. So I went ahead and collapsed the solution so I can show you real quick everything that I talked about. You see Android, iOS, UWP, my Xamarin.shared project, WPF, and the shared project, okay? If I'm going to open Xamarin.shared, inside of it, you will see I have some specific Xamarin controls, right, that are shared. And inside the views, I have a start page.xaml, which is what provides me the UI for the three Xamarin apps. On the WPF side, I have my main window.xaml, which provides me the UI for my WPF app. And in the mapsapp.shared, I have a folder called view models in which I have all of my view models that contain the logic of the application. Specifically, what we're going to look at today is the geocode view model, which provides the geocoding functionality of the application. Again, all of this is open source, so you're more than welcome to go in there and dig through it. So, I'm going to just close this down to give you a little better view, and let me make this a little bigger. Okay. So if we go to the very top, where are my bookmarks? Okay. The very first thing that I want you to take a look at is I'm setting up my XML namespace to get to those view models that I showed you in my shared project. And I'm referencing the view models folder, okay? Then I set myself a resource that points to that geocode view model, a static resource, okay? Oh, not what I meant to do, sorry. I had to restart Visual Studio, and apparently it messed up my bookmarks. Okay. So let's take a look at the search box that you saw during the demo where I started typing the location that I wanted to search, okay? What do I have? On the Xamarin side, I have a search bar, which I have set the binding context for it to my geocode view model. And my text value is bound to a search text property, which I have in the view model. In the WPF app, I have more or less the same thing. I have my view model XML namespace pointing to the exact same location. I have my static resource, and I have my search box, which it's a different control. You noticed in Xamarin, I have a search bar. If you're familiar with WPF, you know that there's no search bar. So I've made myself a search bar by adding a text box and a button inside of a stack panel. So my stack panel has a data context, not a binding context this time, which is the geocode view model. And then my text box has a text property that is bound to the search text, same as in Xamarin. If we go and take a look at the geocode view model, you'll notice that the namespace for it is what I was referencing in the views. And this is my public search text property, which is what I was binding to in the views. I have, with a setter and a getter. Inside the setter, I'm calling on property change. What that does is it lets anybody subscribe to this property know that, hey, I've changed. Do whatever you want, right, with the value. And if the value is not empty, when it changes, I call get location suggestions async, which it gets the suggestions list that you saw populate. Let's go take a look at that one real quick. So inside of this, I have a locator, and I'm interrogating it to see if it supports suggestions. You have to enable that when you create your locator. If you work with your own locator, you have to enable that inside Pro when you create it. And if it supports suggestions, I go ahead and call suggest async and pass it the text. I also pass it a list of parameters, which I'm setting, meaning I want no more than 10 results returned, and I want to set my preferred search location to the current area of interest, current area around me. Okay. And the suggestions that are returned are placed in an observable collection, which is then bound to the list view control inside the view. There's the list view on the Xamarin side, Notice this source again is geocode view model, and there's the suggestions list. And the same thing on WPF side. I have my list view with the suggestions list. Now, when user taps a suggestion, that suggestion is bound to a property inside the view model, and we have this whole back and forth between the view and the view model. And notice how all of the business logic is shared. Okay. Like I mentioned, this is public. You can go, you can take a look at it, you can play with it, you can ask me questions if you want through either the GitHub repository or through the community, the forums. There are a lot more elements to this. Some of them you'll notice in the shared project over here, there's a folder called binding support. What is that? Well, not everything is bindable, right? If you've worked with .NET, if you've worked with especially MVVM and you've tried to bind things, some things are not bindable. So the binding support contains a list of classes which are, I'm basically creating attached properties to take something that's not bindable and make it bindable. So to show you something real quick, I have a holding location controller. So if the user wants to hold the finger on the map to get the current location, that's an event, right? It's GeoView holding. So how do you get that to be a property that you can bind to? You're creating an attached property on the GeoView. And you can look at all of it inside the GitHub, but basically you've got the GeoView and you're creating an event on it for GeoView holding. And when that event fires, you're setting the attached holding location property, which you then bind to from your views. Okay, now I'm going to bring up the slide with contact information. And before I open it up to questions, I just wanted to share with you a quick kind of lessons learned from doing this app. I made this app using Xamarin Forms because initially I thought it's a pretty simple app, right? I mean, it doesn't do very much. It does a little geocoding, a little routing. Xamarin Forms should be just fine. What I ended up with was a lot of code that I had to write to account for differences in the platforms. So when you write an app like this and you're thinking, okay, I'm going to maximize shared code and I'm going to write one app to rule them all, okay? Think about how complex you want your UI to be. If you want specific elements from the different platforms in your UI, if you want your UI to be just so, to do things, like the autocomplete list that I've made and all of those things, Xamarin Forms did not handle those very well. And I had to do a lot of tweaks and, if iOS do this, iOS doesn't dismiss the keyboard automatically, so I had to account for that. And so think about how complex your app is, and if it's more than one page, I highly recommend going native. Yes, you're writing multiple UIs, but you have a lot more control over what your UI looks like, and you end up doing a lot less fiddling with things and making kind of workarounds to account for things that Xamarin Forms doesn't have. Because it's trying to, you're building one app for all of them, right? It has to have only the common UI element. Okay. And we have 4 minutes, so questions? Any questions? Yes. Yeah. Okay, so the question was, for the GPS, did I leave that code inside the Android project, or is that shared? So it's all shared. There's really not much in the individual Android and iOS projects than just what came out of the box with a template when you start a new project, including the current location, the GPS. You just use the Esri location data source. Okay, so the question is, if you're not using the Esri location data source and you're using the native, right, the Google data source, for example, in Android, yes, I would probably keep that separate and keep it on the Android side, because iOS won't understand that. So that would be something that you would keep there. Any other questions? Okay, thank you so much.